Cashflow Diary Podcast, episode 487.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other Cashflow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Massey, and I'm glad that you are here today because here's the thing. When you are out there, you have an idea, right? And you get started, you're very excited, and at the end of the day, you're like, man, this is going to be excellent. It's going to the moon, right? I'm going to have so much fun building my business. That's what we are thinking. We're entrepreneurs. We're naturally positive. That's kind of what happens. And then we often encounter resistance. Sometimes that resistance comes in many different forms. And sometimes we can be the actual source of resistance. And we have lost track of the fact that we are actually pursuing a long-term goal. And understanding this is important, but most importantly, we'll often ask ourselves this very important question. Do I have what it takes? Can I make it? How long is it going to take before I arrive? And we're trying to figure out these things as we are building our business. Now, let me ask you this question. What would you call that? Some people say, well, these hard times, they develop your character. Others say you just don't have enough perseverance or grit to make it happen. I have with me today someone who literally studies character development, self-control, grit. She is the founder of Character Labs. You may know her from her TED Talk. I have with me, of course, Angela Duckworth. Now, what I'm excited about is the fact that when we are talking about do we have what it takes to make it, we actually have a person who can tell us scientifically how to not only make sure that we have it, but our kids, and more importantly, we go out there and make something happen. Now, here's the thing, guys. We got to pay attention because we a professor from the University of Pennsylvania is about to share with you and I exactly what's it going to take. If you've always wanted to know, well, now we're going to find out. So let's get ready to listen, learn, and love Angela Duckworth. Angela, how you doing?
I'm good, Jay. How are you?
So far, I'm really excited because the simple fact that you study something that seems unstudyable is kind of exciting to me. Like, how do you quantify that? And that's definitely one of many questions I have for you. But before we go there, this being the first time that you're here, I have to ask you the same question I tend to ask everybody else. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. I tend to look at today's entrepreneurs a lot like yesterday's superheroes. You know, Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, etc. And I think superheroes and entrepreneurs have a ton of things in common. Chief among them, that as a superhero or as an entrepreneur, I can occasionally imagine myself flying around town, using our products and services and saving our customers. And maybe I am wearing a cape or a tight, it's a big deal. But at the same time, just like a superhero, an entrepreneur has a beginning. If you think about Spider-Man, for example, there was a time where he was just a kid going to school, doing his thing, taking some photos, trying to earn some pizza money. That was it. And then one day something happens to him. He gets bit by a spider, discovers he's got special abilities, and gets to choose whether to use them for good or for evil. So my question to you is as follows. Before Character Lab, before your book, Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance, before the TED Talk, before being a professor of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. Before all of these things, what we want to know is, who is Angela Duckworth?
I love that question. Well, going all the way back to the beginning, I was just a little girl, grew up in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And for those people who know New Jersey, it's by exit 4. And went to public schools. You know, I don't think anybody thought I was going to be special when I grew up. I didn't hear that from my parents. My dad had very high standards and literally said out loud, you know, you're no genius, which he, by the way, also said to my brother and sister. Grew up and I became a teacher, actually. I taught math to kids in the public schools in New York City and in San Francisco, finally ended up teaching in Philadelphia. And I think that combination of having a dad who was always wondering about, you know, how successful he was and his kids and did they measure up and how smart were they, and then becoming a teacher where that was my job, right, to bring out the best in my young students. I think all of that made me so fascinated, so puzzled really by success and motivation and who really does get ahead and who ends up falling behind. And for me, one of the most important things when I shifted my life to become a psychologist was to realize that, you know, we all our lives, you know, have some idea of, you know, how gifted or talented we are or aren't. And, you know, that ends up being a preoccupation for a lot of people. But what my research says is that a lot of what you do in life is your passion and your perseverance. And that's not talent, that's grit.
Interesting. Okay. So here's the thing. There's this constant question in the world of, are entrepreneurs born or are they made? What would you say?
I would say mostly made. But you'll notice that I qualified that a little bit.
Yes, you did.
I do want to, right? I mean, look, you know, you've got DNA in you, right? Half from your mom, half from your dad. I've got the same, right? DNA from my mom or dad. And there are these tendencies that we are born with, you know, to be a little louder, a little quieter, you know, to be a little more thrill-seeking, a little more cautious. You know, entrepreneurs are people, so they have DNA from their mom and their dad, and that will influence, they'll tilt things in a certain way. So I don't want to deny that, you know, we have something in us that is born and there are tendencies. You know, anybody who has a brother or sister can, you know, see that they have, you know, the same exact house, the same exact, you know, breakfast. But, you know, some of those differences that are really striking to you, well, those are because you didn't inherit all the same genes as your brother or sister did. So, yeah, there's a part of being an entrepreneur that is an inborn tendency. But I'm really interested in the part that is about being made by your experiences, made by your mentors, made by decisions that you know, maybe carried out for good or for bad, but you learned something. I think there's a lot to be said about what you do after, you know, you get handed those cards from your mom and dad. And I think that's the part that really successful people focus on, not what they can't change, but what they can.
Indeed. Now, I'm so excited. I skipped so much right there. Like, did you just wake up one day and go, you know what? I want to study perseverance, grit, character. Like, how did you even come to this? Yeah, that's what I want to do. I don't, like, there's got to be a journey there.
I don't know if you've ever sat down, you know, with a kid or frankly with a, you know, millennial or, you know, someone else that you're sitting down with them and you know that they can do something and you're just urging them to keep trying. I mean, maybe they're screwing up, they're getting a math problem wrong, or, you know, maybe you're coaching a, you know, young entrepreneur and they, you know, they do a terrible first pitch to a, you know, to a VC. You know, because you have more experience that like you can see around the corner. You know that it's going to take a lot of tries, but they're going to learn. Eventually, it's going to be fine. I think what got me starting down this path of studying grit is that when I sat down next to kids and they would give up after, you know, the first or second try, but I could see around the corner and I wanted them to keep going. I wanted them to be persistent, but they weren't. That, I don't know, that frustration of mine as a teacher trying to get people to do what I knew they could do eventually, to be the people I knew they could become, I think that my frustration and, you know, not always being able to bring that out actually led me to study grit.
Interesting. So you were frustrated because they would quit.
yeah, I was really frustrated because they were quitting earlier than I thought. Obviously you want to quit something after maybe tried 100 times and maybe it's just never going to happen. But so many people give up too early, and that frustrated me as a teacher. And I thought, you know what, to really get people to be their best, you have to understand their choices. You have to understand where they are now before you try to get them where you're trying to bring them. And that led me to psychology, because that's what psychology is, a study of human nature.
Interesting. So how do you know if you just quit versus didn't have enough grit?
I mean, knowing when to fold and knowing when to hold them, like the old country music
that's
song.
exactly right.
Right? It's never easy, so I don't want to be glib about it, right? It's never easy. I struggle with that. I'm working on a project. It's my 7th year working on a project sometimes, and I'm like, well, maybe this is me being stupid, right? But I would say this. If you have like a top level goal, and the people that I study who are really successful, I mean, they can often articulate like what their life is about, even in a sentence of, frankly, a short sentence, like 10 words or fewer. For me, it's use psychological science to help kids thrive. And then I'm going to be really stubborn about that goal. There's nothing that would keep me from, taking breaths till my last day to work on that goal. But maybe there's a project that's not working out, and I'm like, you know what? Eventually I'm going to give up on it. But what I don't give up is the end state. What I'm really working toward is that ultimate goal. So I think if you're asking yourself, should I give up or should I not give up? One way to think about it is, is this like a deep personal value, or is this simply a means to an end? Because if it's a means to an end, maybe you can find another means to the same end.
Interesting. So what would you say has been, all right, in the time that you have studied this, what would you say has been like the most surprising finding?
When I went to study the cadets at West Point, these are those, 18-year-old women and men. They get the congressional recommendation. They're often, valedictorians. They're almost always varsity athletes, and they're very often, varsity athlete captains. I mean, they're fine specimens. When they get to West Point, they have a training that's called Beast Barracks, because it's that hard. You wake up at 5, you go till 10, nonstop, and there's no cell phones. There's no contact with your parents. It's really hard. The most surprising thing that I found in my research at that point in my career was that the measure that I had of their grit, their self-reported passion and perseverance, setbacks don't discourage me, staying committed to goals over years, that ended up not only predicting who would get out of training, it was pretty much unrelated to measures of their talent, like their SAT score or, how fast you can run 2 miles. And so that idea, I think, has really driven a lot of my work, that talent and your ability to persist and overcome and to stay true to some goal that's very important to you, that to me is profound, because for a lot of us, who maybe didn't get into the gifted and talented program when we were in elementary school, or, weren't singled out as being the one who was gifted on the athletic field, it says there's something that we can do here that's different from our innate talent.
Whoa, okay, all right. One could interpret or extrapolate from what you're saying that the talented people are at a disadvantage in this area.
Well, I found mostly that it was unrelated to their grit. So it doesn't mean that if people are really smart, talented person, doesn't mean they're going to be low in grit, but there's no guarantee of grit. Some companies feel like, look, we're going to hire kids who are whiz kids because they'll also be hardworking and passionate. And that's not true. You may get lucky, but you may not.
Got it. Now I understand. Okay. Because I mean, hopefully you can understand where I'm coming from. It feels so random. Like if I'm out there trying to bring someone onto the team, will they persevere through whatever they've got to learn in order to actually get the job done? Can they make the objective work? And having grown up in a military household, in my head, the only thing that matters is the mission. It's like, this is the mission. You keep persevering until it's done. Why are you stopping? And it's challenging for me to relate to other individuals who don't see the world that same way. So in your time working with, this concept and individuals, for those of us that are, leading organizations or building our company, how do we learn to either develop that grit inside of our organization for the people, or how can we better relate to those who might not have it?
It is hard, isn't it? I have the same problem of, empathizing with people who, want to go home at 5, want to roll in at 9, never want to think about things on the weekend. It's really hard for me. I don't really fully understand, that way of life, but it's not immoral or anything. It is different. I would say that if you're trying to build a culture in your organization, your company of grit, it all starts with modeling. In other words, you are setting an example for everyone around you. I mean, we all set examples for each other. Everybody's a leader in that sense. But I do think that the owner or the entrepreneur at the top, you're in the spotlight all the time, and people will notice, how you talk to other people. They'll notice how you talk to the mailman when they drop off the mail. I think that there's an opportunity and a responsibility there then to model passion and perseverance. And let me get a little more specific than that. So, for example, with passion, I think it's a great thing to show people that you love what you do, and you were thinking about something on the weekend, heard a podcast that really, inspired you, relates to the mission of the company. Don't be shy. Share that passion. Set it as a norm for the company, that people think about these questions that are, beyond the 9 to 5 routine, and they maybe occur to you in the shower or while you're making your coffee. That passion is something you can model. And at the same time, you can model perseverance. That doesn't mean being invincible. I think the number one mistake that leaders often make is they feel like they need to show strength all the time. I think actually it's much more powerful to be vulnerable and to say, you know what, that was a really tough week, and I was really discouraged, but what we learned from it was. And then people will have the license to, also have some doubts, but then to get up again.
Yeah, there's that thought process that I'm not allowed to be down, so to speak. But I have found that that's where some of the greatest strength lies. In order to keep persevering, is recognizing and giving that emotion some space. So I'm curious, with this information and knowledge and research that you have done, what on earth inspired you to want to write a book about it? Like, why write grit? Why did you?
Inspiration is one way. That my husband just kept nagging me enough that I relented. And, his argument was that if I didn't write a book about my research and somebody else was going to, and, do a really crappy job of it, and that would be annoying to me. And he was right. That was the argument that finally convinced me. I'm sure that's actually what gets a lot of entrepreneurs off the couch too. It's just something annoys you, and you're like, oh wait, I'm going to fix that problem. Anyway, I wrote the book in part because my husband really, got me to it. And it was the hardest thing I ever did. I cried, most days that I was writing it, I think. It was so hard. I have a lot of empathy for people who they struggle, and they wonder how the hell they got themselves into this mess. And I, probably would have quit if my husband hadn't, scraped me off the floor, put me back together again, got me a cup of coffee. I think one of the things that has surprised me about really gritty people, and I'm talking about, everyone, including 300-pound football players, they have somebody in their life who believes in them. And part of grit is not in you, but, the people who love you.
Well, and you're actually bringing up two things that I want to talk about. One, I have found, at least for myself, this to be very true. If I am experiencing extreme negative emotion, or I'm mad at something, or someone ticks me off for whatever reason, I suddenly have all kinds of ability to see that task to the end if I believe it's going to shut them up. For example, what I mean is, when I first got started in real estate, everyone told me what I couldn't do. They said, yeah, hey, you have a credit score of 398. You can't buy a house. They said you're squatting a bank on property. You can't buy a house. You can't do these things. And then I went and did it. And then they said, well, you got lucky. And then I did it again. And then they said, you can't do it with apartment building. So I did it again. Again, because I was mad at that, I was able to sustain the effort to get to the end goal. That's one thing. The other thing that's on my mind is what happens when that outside stimulus goes away, that same perseverance or grit or whatever seems to also disappear. I'm curious as to your thoughts. Hello there, entrepreneur. This is Jay Massey. I know that if you've ever gone over to the site, cashflowdiary.com, you may have asked yourself, where on earth do you get a domain name from? Especially as you are beginning to build your bigger, better, badder business, you need a web presence. You need the email address. You need a way for people to contact you electronically so that you can stop doing the @gmail.com game. Well, the good folks over at GoDaddy have definitely supplied us with every domain that we have ever used. So what I want you to do is I want you to go over to trygodaddy.com/cashflowdiary. Again, that's trygodaddy.com/cashflowdiary, because it's a quick way for you to get set up to capture your domain name the exact way that you want it. They got easy search functions, and most importantly for you is that you'll be up and running today. As I said, once you get started, stay started. Don't let small little obstacles of how to get your own domain name going stop you. So again, go to trygodaddy.com/cashflowdiary, and let's get back to the rest of the story.
So this is what I call the "I'll show you" response to challenge. I have it too, by the way. People tell me, even when I was writing this book, I was walking down the street with a friend of mine who's, a very successful writer and psychologist. He wrote a book too. And I said, oh, your book was great. What was it like being on the bestseller list? And he said, oh, your book's not going to be a bestseller. My book was never on the bestseller list. You can't do that. I said, why not? And he said, we don't write as well as those people who are on a bestseller list. I got to tell you, it was like a fire in my belly. I walked right home and I was like, I'm going to write a bestseller. I think that "I'll show you" response is very much in the mindset of people who, have, I think, a drive and a drive to succeed. Now, the question is, what happens when you do succeed, right? What happens when you do, achieve that goal and prove people wrong? Now, what's interesting about your story is it sounds like you then were looking for the next challenge. And I'm sure it fueled you for them to say, oh, yeah, you can't do it with apartment building. You were just lucky that one time. I think that the people who can continually kind of approach life as if they're an underdog, even when they are the top dog, I mean, that is, what I find as a kind of signature of people who stay excellent instead of getting complacent.
Yeah, I totally agreed. Seeking the next challenge is that is definitely my world. We've now moved over into the short-term rental space, and there's a lot of challenges there that we are tackling, which I think is great. Now, the other thing that you mentioned was environment. Like, can someone have this grit if they're alone? Does someone external who, as you said, believes in them, or that mentor that, believes more of you than you believe of you, is that required?
I haven't yet met the exception. I mean, I am guessing maybe somewhere in the world there's someone who, really didn't need anyone. I don't know if you ever heard about Roger Bannister. He's the first person to break the 4-minute mile, right? Mm-hmm. Now, he wrote a book about it, and he claims to have basically coached himself, right? Like, didn't really need anyone, figured out how to do, like, interval training before there was interval training. And, I then did some research into Roger Bannister's life, and he actually did have a coach, at least for parts of his training, and the guy was named Franz Steltful, and like that was the guy really who like figured out that like interval training, was really more efficient. So I'm guessing that behind almost every high performer, there is somebody who, gave that person advice or encouragement. Maybe it was different people at different points of life. And I definitely think it's the rule. And if people say like, oh, what about this person? That, I still think those are exceptions.
Got it. So the concept in your world of the self-made woman doesn't exist.
No, I don't really believe in completely self-made women or men.
Yeah. Okay. good, because that's kind of where I was coming from. I'm like, I don't know.
Is that your experience? I'm wondering what you
yeah, it's been one. I mean, I'm an amalgamation of so many different people, input books, and in this case, and because of what I get the privilege, although, for those of you listening, I enjoy the fact that you're learning, but I get the privilege of interacting with all of these entrepreneurs too. So, I take from the lessons that everyone has, and I guess, when you take the time to put it in a book, that makes sense, because I know for me, when I was going through my own book, it required grit. There were so many days I'm like, I don't want to, why am I doing this? In fact, I can underscore it by saying I originally was going to do my audiobook. Like, I was going to be the voice. I did like the introduction, and I'm like, there is no way I can persevere through this. And I went and found somebody else whose voice was close to mine. I'm like, you get the privilege of doing that, because I can't do it. I just quit. I tapped out, and that's just where it is. So here's a question on that. How can there's probably an entrepreneur or two who's listening right now who actually should quit something that they're doing, but they don't want to feel like a quitter. They don't want to give up, so to speak. What would you say to them? How can they figure out that what they've been pursuing, what they're actually receiving is feedback that the marketplace is saying, you know what, you should change your direction?
The best piece of advice I could give is that what you need to make a really tough decision, especially when you feel like your ego and your feelings are getting in the way of making a rational decision, is to take a third-person perspective. In other words, you have to not approach the problem like what I should do, but you have to pretend to be somebody else, and somebody else who has your best interest at heart, but isn't all wrapped up with, ego and emotion. What would that trusted advisor recommend to you to do in that situation? And by the way, maybe you just really do have an advisor. And for many people, it's a spouse, it's your husband or your wife, or, it's a former business colleague. It could be a partner. But I think somebody who's just not you, who can get out of your skin, is actually, you really want to weigh that perspective heavily. Now, if you reflect on that and you say, well, if I had a trusted friend, if my best friend would tell me to get out of this, then maybe you should listen to that.
Understood. So you mentioned earlier that, you were a teacher, you were working with kids, etc. But at the same time, you say that entrepreneurs are mostly made. That was a qualified statement. Very true. Mm-hmm. So is there anything that, from a nurture standpoint, that a parent can do to, like, obviously I'm an entrepreneur. My wife is historically, she was, or I say classically trained, so to speak. She went to school. She was she's got multiple degrees and comes from that kind of a family. I'm the college dropout thing, which makes an interesting household. But at the same time, if you're in that entrepreneurial world and you want your kids to gain that, what are some of the ways that we can help them do that?
I think it's a real challenge when you've fought an uphill battle in your life, and then, you have kids and you've worked really hard to make an easy life for them. But then you realize, like, wait a second,
Right.
I also want my kids to have a work ethic, resilience. So I think that kids are best off when they are challenged and supported. And for people who are privileged, because they've worked very hard and then they have kids, the challenge part ends up being, pretty hard to pull off, because, they've gotten, like, I think about my own kids, like, they've got their Whole Foods raspberries, freshly washed on the table, and then, somebody washes their laundry. I mean, that's ridiculous. So do a hard thing yourself and have a family rule that everybody has to do a hard thing. Some kids might have it be a paid job. Other kids might make it a sport. But I think that hard thing should be challenging. It should require them to try to improve in a skill, get feedback, get negative feedback sometimes, something where, like, they're not allowed to quit in the middle, right? You're not allowed to quit in the middle of the season. Can't quit your job if you promised your boss that you were going to work through to the end of June. I think a hard thing assigned to, like, literally every family member, mom and dad, no exception, is a good, way for kids to grow up. And I would say, that can start pretty young, actually. And as long as a kid has some choice in that hard thing, in other words, they get a choice between baseball and swimming and violin or whatever, then, they will start to learn responsibility.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, I have 4 kids. One of them, she hasn't met a hard thing yet. She is all about give me the neck, and I'm like, you are just like your dad. This is gonna be a problem. She was like, I'll take that challenge. What's next? What you got? Yeah, I mean, she can.
How old is she?
She is 10. She is 10.
Awesome.
And if you ever, I mean, you don't understand. It's down to who can put their seatbelt on first in the car. And it's like, it's a thing all the time. And I'm just like, wow, all right, well, we got to channel that and work with that. And I'm waiting for the time where she runs into something that actually does give her a challenge. Because, man, when that does happen, it's going to be an eye-opening experience for all of us. But this leads me to your work over at Character Lab. Tell us about the genesis of that. What is it? And why, again, why do it? I mean, you've got a book, you got your teaching. I'm just like, okay, she's just
why
do
start a
everything.
nonprofit? I had enough things going on. I got 2 kids at home. That's not like having 4 kids at home, but it feels like a lot. I met a couple of educators just after I finished my PhD, and this is now more than a decade ago. And these educators are named Dominic and Dave. And they said, we need to really help parents and teachers use science to help their kids develop things like grit and self-control and curiosity and emotional intelligence. They said, let's call it Character Lab. And I said, sure, let's do that. And that's really what it is. It's a nonprofit. We're based in Philadelphia, but we have a website, characterlab.org. And we take science on things like grit and we turn it into actionable advice for parents and teachers. And everything is supported by foundations and individuals, so it's all free.
Now, you say it's for parents and teachers, but I'm listening. I mean, I'm just listening to you going, well, maybe it'll work for me too.
That's the great thing about character, right? I mean, if you're helping your daughter with her algebra, you're like, okay, well, I had to help her with my algebra, but now I'm going to go back to my email and my work. But when you're helping your daughter learn how to set a goal and make a plan, you're helping your daughter, identify and develop her passion. You're helping your daughter, figure out, what are ways that we can be socially intelligent in situations that are, full of conflict. Look, those are things that your daughter needs. Those are things that you need too. And I love that about character. I think character development is for people of every age.
Yeah. And so what are some of the things that you guys actually do over at Character Lab? Like, give us an example.
Here's one, and I bet a lot of your listeners are familiar with it. You ever hear of the 10,000 hour rule?
Yes, absolutely.
That it takes 10,000 hours of practice, right? To get you. So there is a scientist behind that, famous phrase, and his name is Anders Ericsson. And he studies Olympic athletes, and he studies, world-class mathematicians. He studies experts, and what he has developed with us, based on his decades of research on experts, is, a quick way of learning how experts practice and how to apply that kind of expert practice to anything you do, whether you're trying to be, a better tennis player, a better student. And so we've developed a playbook on practice. And, you can go to our website. We had the video for it narrated by an expert, Wynton Marsalis, who, immediately saw how this applied to his own life as a jazz musician. And then, there are worksheets and, we tried to write everything based on science, but without any scientific jargon. So that's an example of, what we do. It's a lab for developing character, and it's all based on research, but it's also, I think, accessible to anyone who just cares about kids.
Interesting. Got it. And so what have there been, I guess, parents who have come to you, like, can you help me, that type of thing?
I get a lot of parents who ask me to help them individually, and unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time, to give advice, one-on-one. But yeah, we have heard that, having these resources and knowing that they are based on science. I mean, there is a lot of advice out there on the internet and in the world, but, if you want to know what's based on evidence, what's based on, more than just like your grandmother's, wisdom, then I think this is really helpful.
Hey, grandma knew some stuff though.
Yeah, grandmas are probably right, but, we should test some of their grandma's hypotheses if they hold up.
Yeah, no, I understand.
They don't all hold up. My grandmother thought, like, if I cut my nails really short, then I would grow up really tall. I'm like, that wasn't actually, that was a good hypothesis, Grandma, but that turns out not to be true.
I see. That there's very little data to back that one up. Totally understood. So for those that have listened this far and want to find out more about what you guys are up to, what's going to be the best way for them to track you down?
Well, if you're a parent or a teacher, I'd love for you to visit characterlab.org. And if you're not and you just want to learn about grit and, get the grit scale and all that, you can go to angeladuckworth.com. And I put all the insight that I have into my book on grit, and I called it Grit, the Power of Passion and Perseverance.
Excellent. Now, I have a final question for you, and I gotta be transparent here. I am beyond excited to ask it of you because I'm like you. I'm expecting the most unique answer that I have ever gotten out of the hundreds.
No
of
pressure.
I feel none. I feel none.
Of course, you're asking the question.
I know.
I'm answering the question.
Okay. So here's the situation. Let's assume that there's someone listening, in fact, right now, who may have gotten, we'll call it their second win. They're like, you know what? I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to become an entrepreneur. They are standing in front of what I would like to call the superhero outfit store. They're going to make it happen, Angela. And that's where they are. And they're at what I like to call the precipice of decision. And like I know, that when we reach these moments, what ends up happening is that we have a companion. And that companion often comes in the form of a voice. And it's a voice that often says things like, don't you know what happened last time? And oh my God, you're going to do what? Are you sure? Why don't you just quit now and save yourself the time, trouble, effort, and money? And for some people, they're related to that voice. So my question to you is as follows. This time, however, they're going to follow through, and they're going to follow through within the next 24 to 48 hours. They're going to do exactly what you say. So what would you suggest that they do?
Look for a small win. When you think about grit, it's perseverance over decades, and you might think like, oh, well, all I should be doing is thinking about like the long game, right? But if you look at paragons of grit, what they do actually is they organize their life so there are daily, hourly small wins. Don't try to bite off everything, all at once. Do something in the next 24 hours that you're pretty confident you could do, and maybe it's like a micro step in the direction that you want to go. But one micro step after another, that is the journey.
Yes. See, that wasn't so hard.
I got through it. I did it.
Yeah, right,
that was a small win.
Indeed.
I feel good about myself.
There it is. I don't know if you've seen episodes of Dora the Explorer, but every time she is always.
I have.
I did it. Oh, like anyway.
Exactly. You like Dora.
I definitely appreciate the work that you're doing, the passion that you're clearly putting into it, and that you're sharing it so that others of us can actually understand, follow, raise our children in better environments and make things happen. And thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge, your insight, and your wisdom here with us today, ma'am, at the Cashflow Diary.
Thank you, Jay. So enjoyed this conversation. It was great.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. It's time for you to move at the speed of instruction. What does that mean? That means characterlab.org. That's what it means for some of you. For others of you, it means there's a book on Amazon, Grit, the Power of Passion and Perseverance. Your next step in exercising your passion or perseverance is on that device you're listening to. Go get the book. Why? Because you know your goals are worth it. You are worth it. And most importantly, the people who are looking at you, they're worth it too. They want to see someone succeed. Might as well be you. Now is the time to go out there and make it happen, because You only have now a clock. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been fun talking to you today. I look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time.